Imagine a street so narrow that the upper floors of the houses almost touch overhead. The gutters run with blood because every building on it belongs to a butcher, and the meat hangs on hooks in the open air. This is the Shambles in the city of York, England, in the spring of 1586. And in one of those houses lives a woman in her early 30s. A butcher's wife, a mother of 3. She keeps a tidy shop, pays her debts, gives money to the poor, and everybody on the street knows her. In 2 weeks, the city will lay her on the ground, put a door on top of her, and pile it with something like 800 pounds of rock until she stops breathing. Not for murder, not for treason, whatever the paperwork says. She dies because she refused to say 2 words in a courtroom. 2 words that would have started a trial. And a trial would have put her own children on the witness stand. This is the story of Margaret Clitherow. To understand why an ordinary housewife ended up crushed under a pile of stones on a bridge in Yorkshire, you have to understand what England had just been through. In roughly 25 years, the country had changed its official religion 4 times. Henry VIII broke with Rome. His son Edward pushed hard into Protestantism. Then Mary I brought back Catholicism and burned nearly 300 Protestants at the stake, which is how she earned the nickname that stuck. And then, in 1558, Elizabeth I took the throne and swung the country back to Protestantism again. Imagine living through that. Imagine the priest at your parish church telling you, 4 separate times, that everything he told you last time was a lie that could damn your soul. For the first decade or so of Elizabeth's reign, the pressure was manageable. You paid a small fine if you skipped church. Annoying, not fatal. Then, in 1570, the Pope excommunicated Elizabeth and declared that English Catholics owed her no obedience. In one stroke, every Catholic in England became a potential traitor in the eyes of the state. Plots followed. Spanish ships loomed on the horizon of the imagination. And Parliament responded the way frightened governments usually do. The fines for missing church went from pocket change to ruinous. Then came the laws of the 1580s. If you were an English-born Catholic priest and you set foot in the country, that was treason. And treason meant hanging, drawing, and quartering. If you hid such a priest in your house, that was a felony. And in England, a felony could get you killed. Now hold all of that in your head and picture York. York was the great city of the north, a place of stone walls and crooked lanes crowned by the vast bulk of the minster. It was also, from the government's point of view, a problem. The north had risen in rebellion against Elizabeth in 1569. The old faith had deep roots here. So the Crown planted an institution called the Council of the North in York to keep the region in line. And it did that job with grinding bureaucratic persistence. In 1586, York was a city where your neighbors watched you, where church wardens wrote down who was and wasn't at the Sunday service, and where the gallows out on the Knavesmire had already claimed Catholic priests. Into that city, around 1556, Margaret Middleton was born. Her family was respectable, prosperous, and by all appearances perfectly conformist. Her father, Thomas, made candles for a living and served as Sheriff of York. He'd even been a churchwarden. This was not a family of rebels. This was a family with a seat near the front. Thomas died when Margaret was still a girl. Her mother remarried to a man named Henry VIII, who shut down the candle business and opened a tavern. Remember that name, Henry VIII. He's going to matter more than he should. In 1571, when she was around 15, Margaret married John Clitherow. He was a widower with 2 sons, a butcher on the Shambles, wealthy enough to matter in city politics and eventually to serve as one of the city's chamberlains. It looks like a good match. By every account we have, it actually was one. They had 3 children together, Henry, Anne, and William. John was Protestant. Margaret went to church with him. And then, around 1574, something changed. We don't know exactly what happened inside her. That's the frustrating and human thing about this story. But we know that within a few years of her wedding, Margaret Clitherow became a Catholic, not the quiet, keep your head down kind. The kind that gets you noticed. Here's the strange thing, and it's one of the details that makes this story ache. Her husband didn't stop her. John Clitherow stayed a Protestant his whole life. His own brother was a Catholic priest. So the divided household was nothing new to him. And when the fines started coming in for Margaret's absence from church, John paid them, year after year. His only complaint, according to those who knew the couple, was that his wife wouldn't come to church with him. Otherwise, he adored her. The state was less understanding. In 1577, Margaret went to prison for the first time for refusing to attend services. She went back in 1580 and again in 1583. Those stretches added up to years of her life. Her 3rd child, William, was born behind the walls of York Castle. And in prison, surrounded by other recusant women, something happened that the authorities absolutely did not intend. She learned to read. Think about that for a second. The government locked her up to break her, and instead handed her an education and a support network. When she came out, she was more dangerous than when she went in. And when the government executed Catholic priests out on the Knavesmire, Margaret is said to have walked out to the gallows at night, alone, to pray at the place where they died. That's not a woman being worn down. That's a woman deciding something. By the mid-1580s, Margaret Clitherow had crossed a line that most recusants never crossed. She had stopped merely refusing to attend church. She was now running what amounted to a safe house. Understand the scale of the risk. Under the law as it now stood, hiding a priest was a capital offense. And she wasn't hiding one now and then. Her home became one of the most important shelters for fugitive priests in the north of England. She kept a hidden chamber. When her own house came under surveillance, she rented another house some distance away and moved the operation there. Mass was said in secret rooms, in whispers, with someone always listening for boots on the cobblestones. Local tradition even holds that she stashed priests at an inn on Peasholm Green, the Black Swan, where the Queen's own agents were staying. If that's true, it's one of the boldest pieces of nerve in the whole period. She also sent her eldest son, Henry, out of the country to be trained for the priesthood at the English college in exile at Reims. That was, in the eyes of the Crown, roughly the equivalent of shipping your teenager off to enemy officer school. And here's the part that tells you everything about how she was regarded on her own street. Her servants knew. Her neighbors, many of them related to her husband, knew or suspected. And for years, nobody turned her in. Then, in early 1586, 2 things happened at once. The first, the authorities summoned John Clitherow to explain exactly why his eldest son had disappeared abroad. The net was tightening. The second, Henry VIII, Margaret's stepfather, was elected Lord Mayor of York. A Protestant loyalist, now the most visible man in the city, with a notorious recusant stepdaughter operating out of a butcher's shop on the Shambles. Within about a week of his election, the sheriff's men came through her door. The raid happened on the 10th of March, 1586. The men searched the house on the Shambles, and at first they found nothing that mattered. Margaret's whole system depended on people keeping their mouths shut under pressure. The system held. Until it reached a child. There was a boy in the household, a young Fleming, and the searchers turned on him. We don't know precisely what they threatened him with. We know that fear did the job. The boy talked. He led them to the hiding place, and there it was. The vestments, the chalices, the physical evidence of a mass being said in an English home, in defiance of the Queen's law. Margaret was arrested. Any priests who'd been there had gotten out. Her first concern, according to those close to her, wasn't for herself. It was whether her family was safe. They were not. And she knew exactly what was coming. The timing of her arrest was the cruelest kind of coincidence. The traveling assize court, the circuit judges who handled the most serious crimes, was about to arrive in York. If she'd been caught a few weeks earlier or later, a local court would have handled her case. Instead, she went to the top of the docket, in front of two royal judges named Clench and Rhodes, with the great men of the Council of the North sitting alongside them on the bench. On the 14th of March, they marched her from York Castle to the Common Hall, no lawyer. Defendants in Tudor England didn't get one. Whatever was thrown at her, she'd face it alone. Judge Clench stood and asked the standard question. Margaret Clitherow, how do you say? Are you guilty of this indictment or not? And she answered, I know no offense whereof I should confess myself guilty. Clench pressed. You've harbored priests, enemies of Her Majesty. How will you be tried? Her reply is the hinge on which her entire life turns. Having made no offense, I need no trial. She would not plead. Not guilty, not innocent, nothing. Now, to a modern ear, that sounds like a technicality. In 1586, it was a bomb dropped in the middle of the courtroom. Under English common law, a trial could not proceed without a plea, and the law had an answer for defendants who stayed silent. It was called peine forte et dure, strong and hard punishment. The court would stretch you on the ground and load weights onto your body until you either agreed to plead or your ribs gave out. Clench did not want to do this. You can feel it in the record. He kept giving her outs, over and over, in a way judges of that era almost never bothered to do. He told her the evidence was thin. He practically told her that if she'd just let a jury hear the case, they wouldn't convict her on the word of one frightened child. The court tried humiliation too. They hauled in the vestments they'd seized and dressed up two men to parade around in them, mocking her. Asked how she liked those garments, Margaret said she liked them well enough. If only they were on the backs of men who knew how to use them properly. They tried slander. One of the councillors, a man named Hurlstone, shouted from the bench that she didn't harbor priests for religion at all, but for sex. The gallery erupted. She didn't move. The next morning she was back, and this time she went further. When Judge Rhodes said it was plain she'd had priests in the house, she didn't deny it. She agreed. As for good Catholic priests, I know no cause why I should refuse them as long as I live. She said the witnesses against her were only children, and that with an apple and a rod, you could make a child say whatever you wanted. So, why wouldn't she plead? Why refuse the one thing that might have saved her? Part of it was principle. She would not admit the court's right to judge her faith a crime. And she would not sit there while a jury, hand-picked by the same sheriffs who arrested her, went through the motions. But there was a colder, more practical reason, and it's the one that makes this story unbearable. A trial needs witnesses. The witnesses in this case would have been the people inside her house, her servants, and her children. Henry, Anne, and little William would have been dragged into that hall and made to testify against their own mother. And if they resisted, the men who had broken a Flemish boy in an afternoon would have gone to work on them too. She would not let that happen. So she chose silence, knowing precisely what silence cost. Judge Clench pronounced it in the old formula. She would be taken back to prison, stripped, laid on her back on the ground with a sharp stone beneath her, and as much weight laid upon her as she was able to bear. He offered her one more chance. "Think of it," he said. "You have a husband and children to care for. Don't throw yourself away." Her answer scandalized the room. "I would to God my husband and children might suffer with me for so good a cause." The gallery howled. Afterward, her enemies twisted it into a claim that she'd wanted her family hanged. What she meant, of course, was something else entirely. She wanted them with her, on the same side, in what she believed was the only thing that ultimately mattered. They took her out. Sheriff Fawcett, the same man who had arrested her on the Shambles a week before, tied her arms and led her away. And then, remarkably, the machine of Elizabethan justice began to stall. 3 separate times, Margaret Clitherow's life could have been saved. 3 times it slipped away. The first came from her husband, John Clitherow, locked up in York Castle and forbidden from seeing her, heard the sentence and broke completely. He wept so violently, we're told, that blood ran from his nose. "Alas, will they kill my wife? Let them take all I have and save her, for she is the best wife in all England." He offered them everything he owned. It bought nothing. The second came from the possibility that she was pregnant. English law did not execute a pregnant woman. It was, on paper, an automatic reprieve. Her friends and relatives worked at her all week, begging her to simply say the word. She wouldn't. Asked directly whether she believed she was with child, she said she could not be certain and would not for all the world swear to something she didn't know. She thought she probably was, she said, but she would not dissemble with God and the world. And when they asked why she wouldn't at least request a delay, she said, "I require no favor in this matter. You may do your pleasures." 4 women were sent to examine her. Their verdict came back uncertain, leaning toward yes. Judge Clench dug in. He said plainly that if she was with child, he would not consent to her death, because whatever she had done, the infant had done nothing. He said he wouldn't give in for £1,000. And then the third failure, the one that killed her. The Council of the North came to Clench in his chamber and offered him the oldest deal in the book. "Let us take it on our conscience that she is not with child. Clench, cornered between the law and the men who ran the north, took the exit. He passed the whole matter to the council, ordered the execution held until the assizes had left town, and rode out of York with his hands, as he saw it, clean. It's worth pausing on that. A brutal death sentence, delivered not by a fanatic, but by a man who kept trying to avoid it, and who in the end simply handed the decision to someone else, so he wouldn't have to be the one holding it. Her stepfather came to the cell. The Lord Mayor of York knelt on the floor in front of her, wept, and begged her to give them something, anything, that would let him get her a pardon. She refused. Then he asked whether he might take her eldest daughter into his household. She thanked him and said no, because she didn't want the girl raised in his religion. Preachers came and quoted scripture at her until she cut them off. I beseech you, trouble me not. I am no divine. Then, quietly, one of the most human lines in the whole record. My spirit is very willing, although my flesh may repine. She was not fearless. She was afraid, and she kept going anyway. That's a different and much harder thing. 2 days before the end, the sheriffs told her the date. After they left, she said to a friend that she felt the frailty of her own flesh, which trembled at the news. They released John Clitherow from prison and ordered him out of the city for 5 days. Everyone understood what that meant. On her last night, a Puritan woman named Mrs. Yeward, sharing the cell, watched Margaret rise at midnight, take off her clothes, and put on a plain linen garment she had sewn with her own hands to die in. She knelt and prayed until 3 in the morning. Then she lay down flat on the cold stones by the fire for about 15 minutes. Then she went to bed and slept until 6. Friday, the 25th of March, 1586. Lady Day. That year, it also fell on Good Friday. At 8 in the morning, the sheriffs came. She walked out barefoot and bare-legged, her gown loose. Crowds packed both sides of Ouse Bridge. And the thing that everyone noticed, the thing that unsettled them most, was her face. She looked, they said, joyful. She stopped and asked Sheriff Fawcett for a moment to hand out alms to the poor, because her time was short. The toll booth on the bridge was only a few yards from the prison door, and there the last small act of resistance played out. The city sergeants, whose job it was to carry out the sentence, refused. They would not do it. So the sergeants went out and hired beggars off the street. 4 men and 4 women, desperate enough for a coin to do what officials of the city would not. Inside, Margaret knelt and prayed aloud. She prayed for the Catholic Church. She prayed for Christian princes. And then, in front of everyone, she prayed for Elizabeth, Queen of England, that God would bring her to the Catholic faith and give her the joys of heaven, saying she wished as much good to the Queen's soul as to her own. Sheriff Gibson couldn't take it. He stood in the doorway and wept. Fawcett was harder. He told her she must confess that she died for treason. No, no, Mr. Sheriff, she said, loud enough for the room. I die for the love of my Lord Jesus. They laid her down. Beneath her back they placed a sharp stone about the size of a man's fist. Over her they set a heavy door. And onto that door they piled weight, until it reached 700 or 800 weight, somewhere in the range of 800 to 900 pounds. She spoke once more as the weight came down. Jesus, 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 have mercy upon me. It took about 15 minutes. They left her body under the stones until 3 in the afternoon. York had wanted a warning. What York got was a legend. The authorities buried her in secret, in an unmarked spot, specifically so that Catholics couldn't gather at her grave. 6 weeks later, someone found it anyway. The body was recovered and carried off, and to this day, nobody is entirely certain where Margaret Clitherow rests. A hand, said to be hers, is kept as a relic at the Bar Convent in York, where you can still see it. Her husband, John, was a broken man. He eventually remarried. He stayed Protestant to the end. Her stepfather, the Lord Mayor, went around, telling anyone who would listen that Margaret had essentially killed herself, that she'd chosen this, that she was mad. Others in York agreed. Some in the courtroom had said as much when they saw her smiling at her own death sentence. But the story got out, because a priest she had sheltered survived. Father John Mush sat down within 3 months of her death and wrote an account of her life and martyrdom. Based partly on witnesses he sent into that courtroom because he'd have been arrested on sight. That manuscript is why we know what Judge Clench said, what John Clitherow cried out, what she wore on her last night. Most ordinary women of the 16th century vanish from history entirely. Margaret Clitherow survives in extraordinary detail because the state made her too important to forget. 3.5 centuries later, in 1929, the Catholic Church beatified her. In 1970, Pope Paul VI canonized her among the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. Today, there's a shrine on the Shambles and a plaque on Ouse Bridge marking the spot. Tourists walk past both, mostly on their way to buy fudge. It would be easy to make this a story with clean heroes and villains, and it isn't one. Elizabeth's government had real enemies and real reasons to be afraid. And the same century that crushed Margaret Clitherow had burned Protestants alive under Mary. Roughly 200 Catholics were executed in Elizabeth's reign. The machinery was cruel in every direction it turned. What sets Margaret apart isn't that she died. It's what she was protecting when she chose the way she died. Strip away the theology, the politics, the Latin legal phrases, and here is what's left. A woman in a courtroom with 2 words in her mouth that could start a trial. And on the other side of those 2 words, 3 children, waiting to be marched in and questioned. She swallowed the words. She took the stones instead. Whatever you believe about her faith, that part isn't really about religion at all. That's a mother. And maybe that's what still unsettles people about her 400 years on. Not the horror of how she died, though that's hard enough. It's that the state gave her every chance to save herself, over and over, and every single one of those chances ran straight through her own children. She looked at the offer, and she said nothing.